what I can do is talk a little bit while we take a look at the time lapse which I did of this. So I did record this concept when I did it because I was doing it for a course I was teaching. So I can talk a little bit through that. It's going to be a little bit weird because it's on YouTube and I don't know where the original file is anymore, so YouTubeception. Firstly, I'll just show you what I've got going on in the Photoshop file. My Photoshop files are very messy. I don't tend to do a good job of keeping layers tidy unless I need to for a client or whatever. Usually I just add a layer when I'm doing a change that I'm not sure if I'll want to keep, basically. So that's my logic. But I've tried to put them into groups that I can just switch off and we can take a look at. So we can just deconstruct the concept back to the block out a little bit. And then I can talk about my painting technique while we watch the time lapse briefly. My attempts at grouping these layers is probably painful for many people. I don't turn off the copy function, don't rename my brightness and contrast layers, don't really rename any of my layers actually. Anyway, so let's turn off this first group that I've got here. And you can see that as the end of the concept, come here. As the end of the concept is coming round, I've started adding in more details to my foliage around here. I've started adding in ivy, flowers, just little things, tile work that I haven't added in earlier, just little details, more interesting silhouettes. If I turn off the next layer, you can see that before, earlier on in the concept, I'm working with very much flat colours. The whole base of the scene is indeed just flat colours with subtle gradients added on in places, so you can see that the colour on this archway changes from this colour to this colour with a couple of steps in between. There's a couple of other gradient changes here, but for the most part it is just a flat colour. And the same goes for things like these stairs here. And later on what I've done is I've just gone in and added in some variation using just lines to create like tiles or bricks. Some down here too. And the big one is these black and white tiles. I like adding black and white tiles into scenes. It's just a thing that I enjoy. So to break up the initially just white stairs, I've got this stripiness going on. And that just adds noise, I guess, to that area of the scene. And next to this grass, which is plain green, again has a little bit of a gradient running across it. Through to yellow. The contrast between that noisiness and this flat colour is basically what I was going for there. So if I turn that off, you can also see that I took the tall spiky bits off the building and added a few colour areas to my building. A few colour areas and some speckles of light. And again, just more details, more interesting speckles to the light. I'm literally making up these lighting things here and up here, just to add interest. And the areas of colour that I'm adding to the otherwise plain white building, again, it's just to break up the large areas of white and add interest. all of my stuff that I do is all about contrast between areas. So contrast between colours, contrast between materials, contrast between noisiness, contrast between areas of light and dark, contrast between saturation. It's all about considering where those contrasts are and playing them off of each other to maximum effect. So I'll try and go into that a bit more later in the 3D stuff. Let's turn that off. What else do we have? I started adding in my trees. So earlier on, I'll have just put down flat colours for everything pretty much, with no lighting. So just the local colour really. The colour that something would be without any lighting hitting it or any shadow on it. They're quite bright colours. A local colour would usually maybe be a little bit closer to neutral, like 50% grey, kind of a bit darker than this. And I do have these peachy areas at the top where the lighting would be hitting from above. But I just go in after the fact and darken everything down, add in basically everything over here is going to be in shadow because we've got the sun coming from here. So this area is more in light and this area is more in shadow. So I just go in and darken everything. And it's just working with the lighting that I had inside Unreal Engine. So I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm not really making too much stuff up apart from maybe adding in some speckly bits just to break up the plain edges a little bit more. But I'm just copying what I have inside my block out. The only thing that I'm really doing here that is difficult is bringing in colours and choosing the colours where it's in shadow and choosing the colours where it's in light and putting those down and trying to make everything just sit nicely together. It's quite hard and it does just take practice, and I'm definitely not good at it yet. I'm still working on it because obviously this place doesn't actually exist and there's only so much I can do from my head where I go, oh, here's this greyish colour, and when it's in light it's going to go warmer, and where there's a shadow it's probably going to be more blue, because if the sky is blue or it's a bright sunny day, the shadows tend to be more bluish. So I put more of a blue tint into the shadows, but I'm being quite stylized and quite free still, because these colours are obviously not what happens in real life at all. It's very much a made-up thing, but that's why it tends to be more visually pleasing. But it's a fine line between making stuff that's visually pleasing and stuff that just doesn't quite ring right and doesn't make sense. I don't know where I fall on that just yet. The problem with concepting something as colourful and nonsensical as what I'm doing here is that when it comes to me making this in 3D, it's going to be difficult to replicate, because in Unreal Engine, ultimately the only lights I really use is a skylight, which affects the shadow colours, so I get that blue colour that I was talking about in the shadows, and a sun, which is warmer, and that's where this strong 45-degree light comes from. Then I might place a few point lights around if I really want to bring in maybe some bluish colours into areas, maybe where there's water or something like that. But I can't just put in a light and expect it to do exactly what I've put in the concept. I do just tend to, when I'm concepting, be a bit more free with the colours, and just I don't want to think too much about how I'm going to do it in 3D later, because I'm just going to lose the feel and the nice vibe. So I just tend to go wild and deal with the 3D bit when I get to it. There's all sorts of techniques and tricks that can be used, especially if you're a more technical person. But for me, I'm not technical. I just do the best with what I have. Just go a bit wild in the concept. Don't worry about it. Have fun. And then that's part of the challenge, I guess, trying to make it work. What else did I do? Okay, at this point it's probably not much use to show, but it does go back to my 3D base ultimately. I tend to work I'll work a few layers and then I might drop back down a few layers down and start adding in colour behind layers, which is why as I drop further and further down it gets messier and messier until you just have blobs of colour like this, because there'll have been a gap in my layers where the 3D base is showing through, and I'll have just dropped right down to the bottom layer and painted in some green to fill in that white area, and it just kind of sorts itself out. And then when I try and view it through the layers like this, it just becomes an absolute mess. So don't look at that. What I'll do is now I will pull up, there's a line on top, I'll pull up this time lapse I did so we can have a look at that. Unfortunately I didn't begin recording this from the very beginning, but it's pretty close. So you can see from the starting point that I've just started out with flat colours pretty much, just going where there's bright light, going in with the lighter version of the colour, and where it's in shadow, going in with the darker version. The way that I choose the colours, there isn't really a specific way that I'm doing it. I tend to just add purple or blue to the colour, so I'll paint the light colour down, say, and add purple or blue to it, just in layers, paint it on with my brush. So I guess I could just demo that real quick. Let's have a look. It's hard to do one-handed with a bird. You go there. Go on, please. Thank you. So let's say that my wall is this colour. So in shadow, it's probably going to be darker. And it might, let's say even darker than that. I literally just keep testing it out, and I'll just keep adding layers with a brush with pressure sensitivity on, and just paint in the colour. So maybe this is the starting point, and then I'll just go in and pick up blue and then just paint that over gently. Maybe I don't like that, it's maybe going too grey, although it's not so bad actually. It kind of goes to a more purpley greyish colour, and then if I want I can just pull up the saturation a little bit and just paint some of that in. Maybe I want to add in a little bit more blue. I kind of treat it like I'm mixing colours with paint. So it's a lot of colour picking and then maybe bottling out on a change and darkening it back down. But that way that I get lots of variation. So I might have a gradient that works from this more saturated purple colour to this more greyish colour. Same goes for in the light. So maybe in the sun it gets more orange on it. So I might have areas where it's just got that little bit of extra lightness to it. Or maybe it needs to be a little bit less saturated, so I'll just bring the saturation down. Now bringing down the saturation increases the lightness. So you can see when I paint that next to it, bringing the saturation down just makes the colour brighter as well. So I get those colours. If I increase the brightness as well, that's even more so. Bring down the saturation. The more I bring down the saturation, the more white I'm adding in, so actually the lighter it goes. So there's no way I'm ever going to go up to bright white, but you can see how I can get a range of tones through changing the saturation or the brightness. But I'll never just bring the colour down for the shadow. Like if I just take this colour and turn down the brightness and be like, oh, that's my shadow colour, it's just not got quite the same punch as having this purpley colour in there. So yeah, might have highlights with this really, with this really bright colour for edges, and then I might have areas with this more reddish colour, every time, and then areas with the purple when it's in shadow. So generally I'll just take a colour, can do it with the green, so this might be my local colour, then I might want to brighten it up, so usually I'll bring up the brightness and I might increase the saturation a little bit, might add in a little bit of warmth, so I'll just go and pick up some yellow, add in a little bit, maybe bring up the brightness again, just paint over there. Then I might want to add the shadow colour, so I'll just pick my local colour again, bring down the brightness, bring up the saturation a bit, and then I want some blue in there because it's my shadow, so I'll just paint in some blue. And I might want it to be a bit more greenish, so I might just hue shift it. I always use hue, saturation, brightness sliders in Photoshop, so then I can shift the hue, shift the saturation and the brightness separately to get the exact colour that I want. So I might want a bit more green in there, so I'll just paint over a bit more green, maybe bring down the brightness and up the saturation. So you can see how I just get some interesting colours through doing that. And then you can start blending them together to get gradients if you really want. So usually I just go in with a bigger brush and can just brush between the two quite easily. Especially when I'm using lasso tool, which I use a lot, so I can just kind of select a area, fill it with my, turn up my brush size, fill it with local colour. Ooh, you don't like that. And then I can just sweep in with my brush and then just fill in bits, soften it up if I need to, and maybe bring in an area of shadow down here. Could use a soft brush if you can't be bothered to blend it like I just did. My computer is a bit old now, I'm struggling. But there you go, you get the idea. So you can blend stuff quite nicely. And I always have these little elements of gradation between stuff, just to spruce up the feel of areas. So if I turn off my line, everything generally has a subtle gradient to it. You probably just can't really see it super clearly. So even the building shadow up here starts off that colour, and as you move down it just shifts between these two colours subtly. So pretty much everything does that, and it just adds a bit more interest. So back to the time lapse. So I begin with lots of areas of flat colour, and I paint in my shadow colours as well. I'll be adding in gradients already. Using the lasso tool, tons, selecting an area, painting in a flat colour, and then adding in a gradient with the method that I just showed you. Sorry, it's quite like headache-inducingly fast. So I work directly over my lines, and I'm just going in and literally filling in areas of colour based on what the light and shadow is doing. You can see with the shadow area on those leaves, I've got quite a strong gradient going on. I'm kind of picking up from the colour on the grass, drawing that warm yellow from the grass, and then moving up into a cooler green as the leaves go higher up in the scene. And that leads into the trees as well. Selecting areas using my black background as well, and just filling in those lighter areas. I struggled a bit with the stairs. I remember I changed the colour so many times. There's a lot of experimentation that goes into this. I don't go in with an idea straight off the bat, really. There's certain colours that I like and that I deviate to by default. But so often my colour palettes end up quite similar across projects, but I don't go in with the intention of doing that. I just feel my way through colours. Usually stones will be more purpley in colour. Grass will be all sorts of types of green, ranging from blue almost to yellow, depending on whether it's in light or shadow, or if there's water nearby, or if there's just more greenery nearby, there might be more greens going on. Water will be anything from green, like green, to blue, to purple. I wouldn't be afraid to put some red in there or something if I wanted to, if it works. I quite often fill in areas using the lasso tool, fill it in with a colour, put a bit of a gradient in there, and then take a hue, saturation, brightness adjustment layer and shift those around as well. Because sometimes you fill in a colour and you're happy with that colour, but if you just take the hue, saturation and shift it around, like bring up the saturation, bring it down, change the brightness a little bit, you'll find that something pops out that you hadn't even considered. Maybe the green that you thought worked so well actually works better more shifted to blue. So I continue like this for a while. I just fill in areas with colour and then start adding in areas of detail as well. Like on the water, I add in the white foaminess. around the building, I'm like, yeah, okay, let's fill that in with some orange, and you can see me shifting the colour to pink and finally settling on a red, and I end up saturating that more. I also mimic the colour, that red colour on the base area that I'm working on now. The reason for that is because I want there to be a good balance of colours throughout the scene. I don't want to just have one thing that's red, like the roof on that building, and then leave it at that. I want there to be little areas in the scene that pick up that red as well, so that it's consistent throughout the scene. I don't want to have the same ratio of red throughout the whole thing, but if there's just little areas that also have that, it just ties the scene together a little bit more. So there'll never be a point at which I use a colour in complete isolation. I'll reach a point where I start turning off the line art. Usually at this point I turn off the line art, but I will duplicate it and make another line art layer at the top of my stack, so I can just turn it on and see what's going on in relation to my line art. But I tend to like not having the lines. It just feels a bit cleaner. So there you can see I've just brought the line art layer on again to start adding in some details again. But I'll start trying to turn off the line layer as much as possible so I can see what's going on for the final thing. So it's quite a tedious process really, but I enjoy it because I enjoy controlling every little element of colour. You can see me here adding in areas of grass and just having fun with the colours, stylising it quite heavily. Playing around with areas of pattern, and then I end up removing those because I didn't like it. I think one of my favourite things is to adding bands of light and having the changing colour between the area that's in shadow and the area that's in sunlight. Getting sort of areas of stripy rainbow going on. I hate detailing stuff. Here I wasn't happy with the values that I had, so I was experimenting with brightening up the stairs and seeing if that made it feel better. But you can see that in my block out the shadows on the stairs are quite dark. Here you can see that I've, if I just pause there, I added in a darken layer. So I think what I did was I took a new layer and just added the whole thing black and then turned down the opacity. So you can see here that the whole image goes darker. And then I've actually started picking out areas that I delete that black from so that they're really bright. So that's a way that I kind of recalibrate my values a little bit. If everything is becoming too bright, then you create a scene that doesn't have any focal areas. You don't have any areas that are pushed back and areas that pop forwards. So I just go in and I darken everything, and then I come in and I start just removing that black layer that I put over the top. I mean, it doesn't have to be black. It can be some colour. But then I just start picking out areas that I want to be bright again and bringing those to the fore again. So that's what you can see me doing here. Just erasing areas. And you see it occasionally turn black and white as well, and that's me checking my values. I always want to make sure that my values, that my scene works in black and white as well as in colour. Sometimes colours that you think should be darker or lighter, when you actually make them black and white, they look completely different to how you imagine they should. Like a yellow, when it's in colour, it really stands out and catches your attention. But when actually you make your whole scene grayscale, that yellow becomes quite dark looking. It's quite interesting, so I definitely recommend playing around with checking your images in grayscale. I start playing around with using a softer brush, but end up going back to having everything quite hard edged. Making sure I have everything, every area of colour that could be a ledge that comes forwards or is pushed back. I always make sure I add just a little edge of highlight or shadow depending on which way that goes, and that just adds to that three-dimensional feel. If I just added bands of colour without that shadow behind, it would just feel quite flat and probably quite unrefined. So my process is quite messy. It comes from love and not much technical skill. So once I've done the larger shapes, then I start going into the finer shapes, the smaller details like the highlights on the stairs, brickwork, start adding in flowers, things like that. But I want to get in the general gist of it first, the main large areas of colour, before I start focusing on the smaller details. You can see me choosing my shadow colours there. And highlight colours. And just now starting to add a few more details. Again, hue shifting, throw in some colour and then just hue shift it around and see what works. Adding in some more interesting shapes to the light. And then ivy, hue shifting it again. Green is just such a good colour. Like, I think green works with like most colours, so I have lots of green in all of my scenes, lots of foliage. And again, if I'm adding in ivy in one place, usually I'll add some more ivy elsewhere, just so it's not one singular bit of ivy. It is being repeated elsewhere in the scene. Just adding in little highlights, areas that catch the light, and just gives it that slightly more three-dimensional feel. At this point, I'm aware of the fact that the back of my diorama has a fountain in it, but that's pretty much it. I haven't really concepted it yet, so I'm just focusing on this part first, having fun with that, and then later on I do a second, shorter concept for the background, the backside. But since this will be the main view, I focus on this first. And that's that. I hope that was something of an insight into the more, I guess, technical side of how I do stuff, what's running through my head as I'm painting. I'm aware that there's only so much I can say when I'm just talking over a time lapse, and the time lapse is quite fast. But I will at some point do a proper, slow, steady, me painting in real time kind of thing, but not right now. What I've got on my screen now is the next stage of my scene when I take it from concepting into the next stage of 3D. So I'll be talking about this a little bit next, and a little bit more about what comes after the concepting stage, how I start planning for moving into 3D from the point of view of working efficiently and trying to get something workable from a concept. I'll also probably in the next video go a little bit into this concept from a finished point of view, my thoughts and feelings, why I did what I did, beyond just the how I painted it side of things. So I'll go a little bit more into the color choices that I made, why I've put certain colors where, a little bit about the composition. I don't know whether it's best to talk about the composition more when I get to the three-dimensional stage of the scene. So I'll think about that a little bit, what the format will be for the next video. But it will be probably talking a bit more about the next video will probably be more talking about composition, lighting, color, making a scene readable, translating that into efficiently planning a scene, and so on. A bit more theory stuff. So I hope that's of interest to people. I'll probably talk about it from a 3D point of view as well, so I'll maybe bring up the concept and the 3D final image, have them side by side, and I can talk about lighting and color and stuff from that point of view, and then just run through all of that in one long video. They were supposed to be short. What happened? Cool, that's that then. Color, lighting, composition stuff in the next video. I need to write it. This one was written when I recorded my last video. Now I am flying completely blind. I have not written anything, so yeah, I should do that. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope it was helpful. Please feel free to comment and tell me what else you'd like to know, if I missed anything. Feel free to reply to me on Twitter or message me. And, if there's something that I'm like, oh crap, I can't believe I forgot that, then I'll just put it in the next video. I've still got quite a lot to cover. People want to see the water shader. That should be quite soon, I hope. I need to re-look at the shader and work out how the hell I did it, because I make shaders and then just forget how I did it, because it just slips my mind and I don't care enough. So I will read up on my own shader, talk about how I did it eventually. So yeah, thank you, and I hope you look forward to the next video. Thanks.